I think comics are a really great medium in that they're so accessible and intimate. You're relating to something in a way that allows the nonverbal as well as the verbal.
Some things are spelled out for you, but some things aren't, you know, and it really depends how the artist or the writer is putting that together and how the reader responds.
With comics, you have such an arsenal at your disposal. And James Stern has talked about comics as being like poetry with graphic design.
The book When I Returned was a production of the Center for Cartoon Studies here. We got an NEA grant to bring a bunch of cartoonists to the White River Junction VA hospital and meet with veterans and interview them, tell their stories in comics.
I was deployed once to Iraq in 2004, so over the summer of 2004, in the Al-Anbar province of Iraq near Haditha. And then in October, we were transferred to Fallujah as part of Operation Phantom Fury. Been drawing, I mean, for a while. I didn't go to college or anything formally for it. I had done it on the side. And it was just something I kept up with after my injury. It was really a challenge, you know, it was something that was challenging. I was shot in my arm, I had a piece of shrapnel still lodged in my wrist.
Comics allow the reader a way to engage with something in a very direct way. And I think one of the ironies of that is that comics, because they're so accessible, they can actually bring complexity into a discussion. The way we talk about veterans in our society is kind of a monolithic thing. And one of the beauties of what comics can do, because they are so accessible, is they can chip away at that monolith and go, no, veterans aren't this thing that we revere in the abstract. When you talk about veterans, it's a plurality of people, and comics can introduce that kind of complexity. This was such a cool thing to have two experiences like juxtaposed against each other. Having Iona tell the story and then having Mike tell the story, and just letting those dissonances exist in the air was really beautiful, and having such different drawing styles really helped emphasize that.
Whereas all the others were very strictly a veteran's story, you know, coming home or returning home story. I think this was sort of like not so much a returning home story as much as, you know, maybe returning home, but also like working and coming together and creating this. Almost all the people in all these pictures in the backgrounds aren't alive anymore. You know, he was shot by a sniper. He was killed by an IED. He was shot by snipers. The guys here and this picture behind aren't around anymore. They were killed in ambush. So it's, you know, including that I thought was important. Well, there is definitely like a bit of a civilian and military divide, and I think that's mostly because there's a fewer percentage of the population serving in the military than what there used to be. You know, during World War II, Korea and Vietnam, you know, it was upwards, you know, around like 50% of the population, you know, had been engaged in the war effort in some capacity. I think even like during World War II, it was like 90% of the population.
My experience with veterans is my grandfather. So he was in the Korean War. So growing up, we were close to our grandparents that lived down the street. And every once in a while, he wouldn't talk about it a lot, but he'd talk about it sometimes. I remember talking to my grandma. She mentioned that he'd still have nightmares sometimes. In my experiences, I didn't want to necessarily talk to him about it because of the nightmares. Well, the veteran whose story we told, he did have nightmares. He did. It's a very traumatic thing for him. It definitely was very hard for him, but it was worth it for him. Just his response after the first time that he read a comic, like, that's all we were doing it for, was he really felt that we did his story justice.
The ethos of the Marine Corps, when you're trained and you're a part of that, you know, harkens back to being a warrior, because it will make you better and allow you to survive on the battlefield. Those aren't things that you just sort of like give up. Everyone would say like a transition, you know, like returning home's like this transition. And I don't like using that term because it's like it implies point A to point B, that there's an end of the line. I don't think returning home's like that. I think it's, you know, like a lot of things for a lot of people when they, you know, have to go through stuff, it's about adapting. So I don't think there's ever like this transition. I think it's this constant, evolution and adaptation instead. And I think, and that's maybe just from being from the military, adapt, overcome, improvise.
I used to work with severely emotionally disturbed youth, and through the course of that work, I was eventually physically assaulted by one of the kids I worked with. The mental health field was no longer a healthy option for me, so as one does, I dropped everything, moved across the country, and became a cartoonist. The actual form of comics is really helpful in understanding what it's like to live with PTSD, because when you have PTSD, you have all these moments existing simultaneously for you. In comics, when you look at them, you have all these moments existing simultaneously on a page, very much like that feels like when you're dealing with PTSD, but it also gives you a structure that allows you to place those moments in a chronology that makes sense.
I mean, as individual as we are, it seems like everybody has something of a need to communicate with someone else. So just being able to tell a story and have someone acknowledge and listen and be receptive. You never know another person's story. It's hard enough to know your own. So just being, receptive to anybody, let alone especially a veteran.
I know people who didn't make it back, and I'm positive that they would want their story told. And I try to make sure that that gets accomplished in some of my work, because I owe a debt of gratitude to a huge debt of gratitude to those people, to my fellow Marines.
Local support for veterans coming home is provided by Twin State Technologies and the Cloudsplitter Foundation.